Ethan had always considered himself an ordinary student. He was far from the strongest or the bravest, and he certainly never imagined he'd be involved in something so monumental. He spent most of his days in the quiet corners of the university, studying the history of the galaxy, the rise and fall of empires, and the complex interstellar politics. His world was filled with books, not battles. The university was located on a human colony, a small but thriving settlement in the heart of a spacefaring galaxy. It was a peaceful place, where the most dangerous thing was a bad exam grade. The students were mostly from Earth, though there were some from other planets too. The mix of species made for an interesting environment, but Ethan never felt like he fit in. He was just a regular human, doing his best to get by. That all changed one fateful evening. It was a day like any other when the universe decided to turn Ethan's life upside down. The sky above the colony shimmered with the light of distant stars as the university prepared for the most important event of the year. The galaxy's leaders were gathering at the Central Conference Hall for an intergalactic summit, where they would discuss matters of peace, trade, and diplomacy. The air was thick with excitement, but Ethan was more interested in finishing his assignment on ancient civilizations than attending the summit. Little did he know, this event would bring more action than any history class could ever offer. Ethan had just finished his meal in the student cafeteria when he felt something strange. A sense of urgency hung in the air. He dismissed it at first, but then he heard the distant sounds of alarms ringing throughout the campus. Before he could react, the ground beneath his feet shook. The entire university trembled, and he could hear the frantic shouts of students and staff running in all directions. His heart raced. Something was wrong. Ethan ran to the window and looked out. In the distance, he could see a massive spaceship descending rapidly toward the conference hall. It wasn't like any ship he had ever seen before. It was sleek, dark, and menacing. As it landed, a series of explosions rocked the building. Panic spread like wildfire. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed his bag and sprinted toward the source of the chaos. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. Something terrible was going on. He arrived at the conference hall just as the situation turned grim. There, in the heart of the building, a group of armed assailants had stormed the event. They were highly trained, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. The security forces tried to fight back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Ethan could barely make sense of the chaos unfolding before him. In the center of it all, he saw her. She was surrounded by her guards, but they were quickly being overwhelmed by the attackers. Ethan recognized her instantly. The woman in the center was the alien princess, Lyra. He had seen her face on news feeds before, but seeing her in person was a different experience. She was unlike any person he had ever seen, tall, graceful, with striking features that seemed to captivate the very air around her. Her royal guards fought valiantly, but the attackers were closing in fast. Ethan didn't hesitate. His mind went into autopilot, and before he knew it, he found himself running toward the princess, determined to help. He didn't know what he was doing. He had no weapons, no training in combat, but in that moment, something inside him told him that he couldn't stand by and do nothing. One of the attackers turned toward him, aiming a blaster directly at him. Ethan froze, but in the next moment, he saw Lyra move, faster than he could blink. She kicked the blaster from the enemy's hand with a swift motion, and the two of them were now locked in a dangerous dance, surrounded by enemies. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed a nearby weapon that had been dropped by one of the fallen guards. He didn't know how to use it, but he aimed it in the general direction of the attackers, hoping to provide some kind of distraction. It worked. The attackers, distracted by Ethan's sudden appearance, turned their attention toward him. Lyra saw the opening and took advantage of it, knocking one of the attackers to the ground with a powerful strike. Together they fought, but it was clear they couldn't hold out much longer. The attackers were relentless. Just as Ethan thought they were done for, a massive explosion shook the hall, sending debris flying in every direction. The attackers were thrown off balance, and for a moment everything went still. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to Lyra, who was now breathing heavily, her face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, though she was clearly shaken. "I'm fine, but we need to get out of here." Together, they made their way toward the back of the hall, dodging falling debris and evading more attackers. They moved swiftly, but Ethan knew they couldn't keep running forever. Hall was falling apart, and their escape routes were quickly closing off. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the doors to the hall were blasted open, and a group of heavily armed soldiers rushed in, engaging the remaining attackers. The tide had turned. Lyra, still holding her ground, looked at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. She had witnessed his bravery firsthand, and it left a lasting impression. Without him, she would have surely fallen. It wasn't just that he had risked his life to protect her, he had done so with a heart full of courage, despite being an ordinary human, with no special training or powers. "Thank you," Lyra said, her voice soft but firm. "You saved my life." Ethan shook his head, still in disbelief at what had just happened. I didn't do much. I just acted." "You did more than anyone else could have," Lyra replied. "You've shown more bravery than I ever expected from a human." As the battle came to an end, the royal guards secured the building, and Ethan found himself standing beside Lyra, a sense of awe and disbelief washing over him. He had never imagined that his life would take such a turn. One minute he was just a student, and the next he was a hero. Little did he know this was only the beginning of an adventure that would change his life forever. Ask ChatGPT. Ethan stood in the corner of the royal infirmary, still in disbelief. The chaos of the attack seemed like a bad dream that he couldn't wake up from. His heart was still racing, and he could still feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The explosions, the gunfire, the face of the alien princess, everything had happened so fast. Now, as the dust settled and the chaos of the battle died down, he found himself in a calm he couldn't quite understand. He had saved the princess, Lyra, a princess from another world, and yet she didn't seem like royalty. She was more like a person, a fighter, a leader who had the strength to survive the chaos. Lyra sat across the room, resting on a cushioned chair while the royal medics worked to assess her injuries. There were a few cuts and bruises on her face, but she looked as composed as ever, with her piercing eyes fixed on Ethan. She was beautiful, but it wasn't just her appearance that stood out. It was her calmness in the face of danger. It was the way she carried herself even after the terrifying ordeal. Ethan felt a bit out of place, standing there in his simple clothes, surrounded by the advanced technology of the Royal Infirmary. He had always been an average student, never a fighter. But in that moment, when he'd rushed to save her, he felt something he hadn't felt before. Purpose. Maybe it was because of the way Lyra looked at him now. Her eyes, filled with gratitude and something more, made him feel like he had done something truly important. "Ethan," Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. She spoke calmly, but her words carried weight. "You were brave today." Ethan looked up, meeting her gaze. "I wasn't brave. I just did what anyone would do." Lyra shook her head. "Not everyone would have acted as you did. You saw a danger, and you didn't hesitate. You risked your life to protect mine." She paused, her eyes softening. "That is bravery, whether you recognize it or not." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't even sure what to say to someone as important as Lyra. But before he could respond, one of the royal guards entered the room, his face stern as always. "Your Highness," the guard began, bowing slightly. "The palace is secure. The attackers have been apprehended, and the situation is under control." "Good," Lyra replied with a small nod, her voice still steady despite the danger she had just faced. She turned to Ethan, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I think it's safe to say that you've made quite the impression today." Ethan could only manage a nervous laugh. "I don't know if I want to make an impression like that again." Lyra chuckled softly, and for a moment the tension in the room seemed to melt away. Ethan had saved her life, but in that moment, it felt like they were two people just talking. No royal titles, no power struggles, just a human and an alien princess having a simple conversation. "Still," Lyra said, her smile fading slightly, "what you did today wasn't just a matter of bravery. You acted from your heart, without thinking about the consequences." Her gaze softened even more. "I don't think I would have survived without your help." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him at her words. It was strange. He had never felt like he belonged anywhere. Not truly. He was just a student on a distant colony, far from the heart of the galaxy. But in Lyra's presence, he didn't feel small or insignificant. He felt important. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. "I just did what felt right." "You've done more than what anyone could have expected," Lyra replied, her eyes filled with sincerity. "You've given me something I never thought I would have. Trust in someone from outside my world." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "Trust?" Lyra nodded. "Trust is something I've learned to be careful with. People in my position don't get to trust easily. But you're different. You didn't know me, yet you risked your life for me. That means something." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He had never been in a situation like this before, where his actions were so significant to someone else. To him, saving her had been an instinct. He had acted in the heat of the moment without thinking about the consequences. But to Lyra, it meant something far deeper. It meant trust. It meant that despite the vast differences between them, they shared something real. "I don't really know what to say," Ethan admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "I'm just a student. I don't have any special training or skills." Lyra smiled again, this time a little more gently. "Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who don't think they are strong at all. You may not have training, but you have something far more valuable: heart. That's something no amount of training can replace." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had always thought of himself as average, nothing special, but standing here, with Lyra, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was capable of more than he realized. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself spending more time with Lyra. She insisted on showing him around the royal palace, even though it was still under security lockdown. The massive structure was a blend of ancient alien architecture and advanced technology, with towering spires that reached high into the sky and gleaming corridors that seemed to hum with energy. They walked through the halls together, and for the first time in his life, Ethan felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a student from a distant colony anymore. He was someone who had played a part in saving an entire empire. He had become more than he ever expected. Lyra spoke to him about her world, her responsibilities as the princess, the political struggles she faced, and the constant pressure of being watched by millions of eyes. Despite the weight of her position, she didn't seem bitter or angry. She was determined, and that determination was something Ethan admired. Over the next few days, their bond continued to grow. They shared meals, long talks, and countless moments of quiet understanding. Lyra began to open up about her life in ways that Ethan had never expected from someone of her status. And in return, Ethan found himself revealing parts of his life he had never shared with anyone. They were an unlikely pair, a human student and an alien princess. But as time passed, it became clear to both of them that their connection was something special. Neither of them could have predicted that a single act of bravery would lead to such an unexpected yet powerful bond. And neither of them knew where that bond would ultimately lead. But for now, they were content to face whatever came next, together. Ask ChatGPT. The days after the attack were filled with a strange mix of calm and tension. Lyra, the alien princess, had insisted that Ethan stay in the palace for his safety. The royal guards had assured him that the immediate threats were neutralized, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something more dangerous was still out there. Each night, when the sun set over the palace, Ethan found himself lying awake, his mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. The way Lyra had looked at him when she said he had earned her trust, that memory played over and over in his mind. He had been nothing more than a student before, but now he was something else entirely. He was part of her world, even if it was only by circumstance. One evening, as Ethan wandered the palace grounds, he met Lyra again in the garden. The palace garden was a tranquil place, with flowers that glowed faintly under the moonlight and trees whose leaves shimmered like silver. It was a place of peace, where Lyra often came to think. "You seem troubled," she said, her voice breaking the silence. She had a way of noticing things that others might miss. It was one of the things Ethan admired most about her. Ethan looked up, startled. "I'm fine, just thinking." Lyra walked over to him, her soft footsteps barely making a sound on the stone path. "You're not the only one who is worried. After the attack, I know that the people who tried to kill me are not gone. They will try again." Ethan frowned. "But why? What do they want with you?" Lyra sighed and gazed up at the stars. "My father, the king, has many enemies. The throne is a powerful position, and there are factions that want to control it. They think that if they eliminate me, they will take over the empire. But they don't understand that it's not just about power, it's about the people. The empire was built for the good of all its people, not just the rulers. And that's why they don't get it." Ethan felt a weight in his chest. He had always thought of politics as something far removed from his own life. But now, standing next to Lyra, he realized how much was at stake. Her world wasn't just a backdrop for a grand story. It was real, and it was fragile. "I don't know how to help you," Ethan said quietly. "I'm just a student. I don't have any training in fighting or leading." Lyra turned to face him, a small smile on her lips. "You've already helped me more than anyone else ever could. You saved my life, Ethan. And I don't think you truly understand the weight of that." Ethan shook his head, not sure what to say. He had only acted because something inside him had urged him to. He wasn't a warrior or a hero. He was just a regular person who had happened to be in the right place at the right time. "You've earned my trust," Lyra continued. "But I need more than trust now. I need someone who can stand by me as we face what's coming next." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "The attack was only the beginning," Lyra said, her expression turning serious. "I don't know how many more are out there, but they won't stop. They will keep coming, and they will stop at nothing to see me fall. I need someone who can help protect me. Someone who will fight by my side, even when it seems impossible." Ethan swallowed hard. He had never thought of himself as a fighter, but something about Lyra's words struck a chord deep within him. He couldn't just walk away now, not after everything they had been through together. He had already made a choice. He had already committed to standing by her. "I'll do whatever I can," he said firmly. "I'm with you." Lyra looked at him, her eyes softening with appreciation. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't ask for much from others, but you've already given me everything. I won't forget that. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Lyra called upon her closest advisors and strategists, and the royal guards began to double their efforts to secure the palace. But it wasn't enough. Ethan could sense the growing tension in the air. Every whisper in the corridors seemed to carry a warning, and the palace was filled with hushed conversations. The world outside was changing, and the Empire's future seemed uncertain. One evening, as Lyra met with her advisors, Ethan found himself standing at the edge of the palace grounds again, staring out at the horizon. The once peaceful world seemed so distant now. He had stepped into a role he never expected, one that was dangerous and fraught with risks. He wasn't sure what he was getting into, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back out now. As the night grew darker, a sudden chill filled the air. Ethan turned, sensing something was wrong. His instincts, the same ones that had pushed him to act when Lyra's life was in danger, were telling him that something was approaching. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the ground beneath him. The palace guards rushed to the gates, and a warning siren blared throughout the complex. Ethan's heart raced. "They're here," he muttered to himself, his breath coming faster. In that moment, the palace erupted into action. Guards scrambled to their posts, weapons were drawn, and the sound of running footsteps filled the halls. Lyra emerged from the palace, her face set in a determined expression. Despite the tension, she walked toward Ethan with confidence. "They've come sooner than I expected," she said, her voice steady. Ethan looked at her, unsure of what to do. He had no combat training, no experience with this kind of danger, but Lyra didn't seem afraid. She stood tall, ready to face whatever was coming. "We need to move quickly," Lyra said. "They won't waste time this time. They'll come at us with everything they have." Ethan nodded, following her as they moved toward the Royal Command Center. The sound of blasters firing in the distance grew louder, and the ground trembled again. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he refused to back down. If he was going to stand by Lyra's side, he had to be ready. As they entered the command center, Lyra turned to him. "I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to be calm. We will face this together, and I'll need you to stay strong, no matter what happens." Ethan looked at her, a sense of resolve filling him. "I'm with you, Lyra. I won't let you face this alone." Together they prepared for the battle ahead. Ethan knew that the days of living an ordinary life were behind him. This was no longer just about surviving. This was about protecting the person who had saved his life and ensuring that their world and the people in it were safe. From the darkness that was coming, you said. The sounds of battle outside the palace gates grew louder, and the once peaceful air was now filled with tension. Lyra stood at the front of the Royal Command Center, giving orders to her most trusted advisors and royal guards. Her eyes were sharp, focused, never wavering, despite the weight of the situation. Ethan stood beside her, watching as the preparations unfolded around them. Though he had no military training, he was learning quickly. In this new world, he was no longer just a student. He was part of something much bigger. The palace had become a fortress, its high walls and advanced technology providing some measure of protection. Still, Ethan knew it wouldn't be enough to stop the enemies that were coming. The group of rebel factions who had attacked Lyra's summit weren't done yet. They were still out there, and they would come for her again. The pressure on Lyra was immense, and Ethan could see the exhaustion in her eyes, despite her calm demeanor. In the days following the attack, they had learned more about the factions targeting Lyra. They were a mix of power-hungry leaders and groups who wanted to seize control of the galaxy's resources. But none of them had the same vision that Lyra had. She didn't want power for power's sake. She wanted peace, unity, and the prosperity of all races. and that was what made her a target. Despite the mounting dangers, Lyra remained resolute. She couldn't afford to let fear control her. And though Ethan had not yet been a part of many battles or royal councils, he understood one thing: Lyra would not give up. Not now. Not ever. One evening, after a long day of planning, Ethan found himself alone with her in the quiet garden. The stars above shone brightly, but the atmosphere was still charged with uncertainty. Lyra had insisted that they take a break from the heavy discussions. For just a moment, they could pretend everything was normal. "I'm sorry you're caught up in all of this," Lyra said softly as they walked together. Her usual strong tone had softened, and for the first time in a long while, she appeared vulnerable. "You never asked for any of this?" Ethan glanced at her, sensing the weariness beneath her words. "It's not your fault," he replied. "I never expected any of this to happen, but I can't walk away now. I promised I'd stay." Lyra stopped walking and turned to face him. Her eyes, usually so full of purpose, now carried a deep sadness. "You didn't have to make that promise," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't owe me anything." Ethan shook his head. "I do. You saved my life by trusting me when no one else did. I can't turn my back on that." For a long moment there was silence between them. Lyra's gaze softened, and she took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. "Ethan," she began, "I want you to know that I don't take your loyalty lightly. You've shown me more kindness than I deserve. You've risked everything to stand by my side, and that means more to me than words can express." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him at her words, though he didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being treated with such respect, especially not by someone of Lyra's status. But there was more to their connection now than just mutual respect. There was something deeper growing between them. "I don't want to be just a hero to you, Lyra," Ethan said. "I want to be more than that. I want to be someone you can trust, someone who stands beside you, not just in battle, but in everything." Lyra's expression shifted, her eyes searching his face. She stepped closer, as if she had something important to say. "You already are," she said, her voice steady. "You're not just my protector, Ethan. You're becoming someone I never thought I'd find. A partner." The word hung in the air between them, and for a brief moment, everything else seemed to fade away. Lyra, the princess with the weight of an entire empire on her shoulders, was looking at him as an equal. A sense of warmth filled his chest, and, for the first time since the attack, he didn't feel out of place in her world. He had a purpose here, and it wasn't just as a bystander. It was something more. "I don't know what the future holds," Lyra continued, her voice quieter now. "But I do know this. I'll fight for what's right, for the people of this empire, for the peace we've always dreamed of, and for you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "I'll fight with you, Lyra. Whatever comes next, I'm not backing down." She smiled, her usual strength returning to her features. "Good, because the worst is yet to come." As if on cue, the palace alarm sounded again, a deep, echoing warning that sent a ripple of tension through the air. Ethan and Lyra exchanged a brief glance before they rushed toward the command center. The guards were already in position, preparing for what was coming. In the distance, the sound of ships approaching filled the air. The rebellion was here again, and they weren't going to stop. The sky above the palace began to darken with the silhouettes of enemy ships, large and intimidating. It was clear that this wasn't just a small skirmish. The rebellion had brought their full force this time. They had come to take what they believed was rightfully theirs, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. Lyra stood firm, her posture unwavering as she addressed her commanders. "We've trained for this moment," she said, her voice loud and commanding. "This is our chance to show the galaxy who we are. We won't be defeated today." Ethan stood beside her, ready for whatever came next. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a part of something greater now. He was part of a fight that was bigger than just one world, one empire, or even one rebellion. He was fighting for a future where peace and justice mattered more than power and control. The battle would be hard. The stakes were higher than either of them had ever imagined. But as long as Lyra and Ethan stood together, they knew they could face anything. "I've got your back, Lyra," Ethan said, his voice steady with newfound determination. She glanced at him, a small smile on her lips. "And I've got yours, Ethan." With that promise in the air, the battle began. The palace gates opened, and the forces of the rebellion charged forward. But Lyra and Ethan were ready. They were no longer just a princess and a student. They were partners in this fight, standing side by side against the forces that threatened their world. And no matter what happened next, they would face it together. The battle had raged for hours. The palace walls trembled under the force of explosions, and the sky above was filled with the thrum of battleships. Yet, through all the chaos, Lyra remained calm, directing her forces with the precision of a skilled general. Ethan stood beside her, still not fully accustomed to the reality of war, but his resolve had only grown stronger. He had promised to protect her, and he would not back down now. Inside the palace, the royal guards held their ground, fiercely defending the gates, but it was clear that the rebellion had come prepared. Their numbers were overwhelming, their weapons stronger than anything the palace had on hand. Yet Lyra had one advantage the rebels had not anticipated: her determination. Ethan had spent the past several hours helping where he could, moving wounded soldiers to safety, offering support to the royal guards, and even standing by Lyra's side as she led their defense efforts. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of things, but it felt like enough. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged. Not just as a human in a foreign palace, but as part of Lyra's world, as part of the fight for something bigger than himself. Through the thick smoke of the battlefield, Lyra turned to him, her face set with determination. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible over the noise, "I need you to do something for me." Ethan, who had been checking on a group of soldiers, turned to her. "What is it?" he asked, his breath heavy, his hands trembling slightly from the tension. "I'm sending you to the royal chamber," Lyra said. "There's a hidden vault there, and inside it is something very important. I need you to protect it at all costs." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What's in the vault?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, her expression softening as she met his eyes. "It's the royal lineage, our legacy. If the rebellion takes it, they could destroy everything I've worked for, everything my family has built. It's more than just a symbol of our power. It's the key to the future of my people." Ethan nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had no formal training, no royal blood, but in this moment, Lyra had entrusted him with something more valuable than anything he could imagine. "I'll get it," he said, his voice firm, despite the fear swirling inside him. Lyra's eyes softened, and for a brief moment she stepped closer to him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what I would do without you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "You're not alone," he said, his voice steady. "I'll always be here." Without another word, Lyra turned to her guards, giving them orders to continue holding the line. Ethan quickly made his way through the palace, dodging blasts and keeping low to avoid the crossfire. The hallways, which had once seemed so grand and majestic, were now a blur of flashing lights and debris. But Ethan had only one focus in mind: the royal chamber. He reached the chamber doors and paused for a moment, gathering his strength. He could feel the weight of the task ahead of him. This wasn't just about protecting a vault. It was about protecting Lyra's legacy, her future, and the future of her people. He couldn't fail. With a deep breath, he pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The chamber was quiet, almost peaceful, despite the battle raging outside. The large, ornate room was filled with ancient tapestries and golden artifacts. At the far end, behind a hidden panel, was the vault. Ethan moved quickly, his hands shaking as he worked to unlock it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the vault door creaked open. Inside, Lyra's family history lay in rows of carefully preserved documents, royal seals, and artifacts. Ethan carefully collected the most important items, ensuring that they were safe. As he prepared to leave, he heard the distant sound of footsteps approaching. His heart raced. He had to get back to Lyra. Ethan turned, clutching the royal lineage with both hands, and hurried back toward the exit. But as he reached the door, it suddenly slammed open, and several rebel soldiers stormed into the room. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he realized the gravity of the situation. He was trapped. For a moment, panic threatened to take over. But then his thoughts went back to Lyra, her trust in him, her promise of partnership. He couldn't fail her now. Ethan quickly scanned the room for an escape route. He spotted a small window above him, large enough to crawl through. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward it, narrowly dodging a blast that grazed his arm. He climbed up, using the royal artifacts as a step, and managed to squeeze through just as the soldiers closed in behind him. The cool night air hit him as he fell onto the palace roof, rolling to soften the blow. Ethan scrambled to his feet, clutching the royal lineage tightly to his chest. He knew he had to get back to Lyra, but the rebels were everywhere. Every step he took was filled with danger, but he kept moving, determined to fulfill his promise. As he made his way toward the courtyard, he finally spotted Lyra in the distance, surrounded by her guards. She was still standing strong, directing her forces, despite the chaos. When she saw Ethan, her eyes widened, and a small but relieved smile crossed her face. He had made it. He rushed to her side, breathing heavily, the royal documents still in his hands. "I've got it," he said, his voice hoarse from the effort. Lyra's eyes flickered with surprise and gratitude. "You did it?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "I did," Ethan replied, offering her the bundle of documents. "I won't let them take this from you." Lyra took the documents, her fingers brushing his briefly. The connection between them was undeniable now, a bond that had formed through shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "I made a promise, and I'm keeping it." Just then, the sounds of more rebel forces echoed from the distance. The battle was far from over, but in that moment something had shifted. Lyra had seen Ethan's loyalty, his strength, and his heart. And now, she knew that they weren't just allies in this fight. They were family. "We're not done yet," Lyra said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But we will win, together." Ethan nodded, standing beside her as the palace walls continued to shake from the force of the ongoing battle. The stakes were high, and the rebellion was not going to stop easily. But one thing was certain. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future. And with Lyra by his side, Ethan knew that no matter how impossible the odds seemed, they would face it together. As the battle raged on, Ethan realized that this was what it meant to have a family. Not by blood, but by choice. A bond forged in trust, loyalty, and a shared mission. And as long as he stood with Lyra, he would fight to protect her, and the future they both dreamed of. "You said," the sun had barely begun to rise, casting a pale golden light over the royal palace. It felt like a new beginning, a calm after the storm. But Ethan knew better. The rebellion was not over yet. The battle had been fierce, and though they had gained ground, the enemy was not easily defeated. Lyra's empire was still in danger, and they still had much to fight for. Ethan stood beside her in the command center, watching as Lyra gave orders to her generals. Despite the long hours of combat and the exhaustion in her eyes, she remained as composed and powerful as ever. The weight of the responsibility she carried seemed to only make her stronger. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," Lyra said, breaking him from his thoughts. She had been keeping a close eye on him ever since their last conversation, and he could tell that her respect for him had grown. It was one thing to save her life, but another entirely to stand beside her through a war. "I didn't do anything special," Ethan replied, though his voice was steady. "I just followed through. You led us, not me." Lyra gave him a small, appreciative smile. "You don't give yourself enough credit. You've proven that you're not just a hero for the moment, you're someone I can rely on for the long haul." The words sank deep into Ethan's chest. He hadn't been looking for praise. He hadn't even been looking for recognition. But hearing her say that made him feel more at home in her world than anything else had. He had found his place in this galaxy, and it was by her side. Lyra turned her attention back to the map of the galaxy displayed on the table in front of them. "The rebellion is not finished. Their forces are regrouping. We'll need to keep pressing forward if we want to. And this for good." Ethan nodded, glancing at the map. The rebellion, though fractured, was still a formidable force. They had to strike while they still had the upper hand. The risk of waiting was too great. But even as the pressure mounted, Lyra's calm leadership gave him hope. She wasn't afraid to make the hard choices, and in turn, he found the courage to follow her lead. "Where do we go from here?" Ethan asked, his voice steady, but with an underlying concern. The next move would be critical. A single misstep could cost them everything. "We strike at their heart," Lyra replied, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We will infiltrate their stronghold and end this rebellion once and for all." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Infiltrating the enemy's stronghold was no small task. It would be dangerous, possibly the most dangerous thing they had attempted yet. But he had already made the decision. He had promised Lyra that he would stand by her, and that promise meant everything to him. "We'll need a plan," he said, his mind already turning over the possibilities. Lyra nodded. "I've already begun preparations. We'll go in under the cover of darkness, using our own forces, to create a diversion. With the rebels distracted, we'll infiltrate their command center and take down their leadership. If we can break their will, we can end this war." The plan was risky, but Lyra's confidence in it gave him a sense of hope. They had come this far together. The odds had always been stacked against them, but they had fought through every obstacle and come out stronger each time. This would be no different. As they moved to prepare for the mission, Ethan couldn't help but think back to the day he had first met Lyra. He had been just a student, ordinary, unremarkable. But in that one moment, when he had rushed to her aid, everything had changed. He hadn't known what he was doing, but in saving her life, he had also found a purpose that had brought him here, standing at her side, fighting for the future of an entire galaxy. Hours later, they stood at the edge of the rebel stronghold. The night was their ally, the darkness their cover. Ethan's heart raced as he looked out at the towering structure ahead. He could feel the weight of the mission settling in. This was it, the final push. Lyra turned to him, her eyes steady and filled with resolve. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but filled with warmth, "I'm glad you're with me." Ethan looked at her, the quiet strength in her gaze reassuring him. "You don't have to thank me. I made a choice. I'm with you, Lyra, every step of the way." The words were simple, but they carried all the weight of everything they had been through together: trust, loyalty, and a bond that had formed in the most unlikely of circumstances. "Let's do this," Lyra said, her voice firm as she gave the signal for her forces to move. With their mission set in motion, Ethan followed Lyra as they infiltrated the rebel stronghold. The tension in the air was palpable, but with each step, Ethan's confidence grew. He wasn't just here to fight. He was here to protect the future they had fought for. He was here to protect her. The journey through the stronghold was tense. Every corner could hide an enemy. Every shadow could conceal a threat. But with Lyra at the helm, they moved with purpose. The rebels had underestimated them, assuming that they could be easily defeated. But they had underestimated Lyra. And Ethan, who had proven time and time again that he was more than capable of handling whatever came his way. Finally, after what felt like hours of navigating the complex maze of corridors, they reached the central chamber. The room was filled with the rebel leaders, their faces twisted with the arrogance of those who believed they were untouchable. But as Lyra and Ethan stepped into the room, everything changed. Lyra's voice rang out, commanding and filled with authority. "This ends now." The rebel leaders sneered at her, but they had no idea what was coming. Lyra had brought her forces, and together they overwhelmed the rebels in a matter of minutes. Their will to fight shattered, and the battle was over. As the dust settled, Lyra stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the room. The rebellion had been crushed. The galaxy would be at peace once more. The mission had been a success. Ethan stood beside her, his heart racing, but there was no fear in his chest. They had won, not because of luck, but because of their strength, together. Lyra turned to him, a small, triumphant smile on her lips. "We did it." Ethan smiled back, his chest swelling with pride. "We did." The war was over, but in that moment, Ethan knew that their journey wasn't finished. They had fought for peace, for a future where Lyra's people could live without fear. And now, together, they would build that future. Lyra glanced at him, her expression softening. "Ethan, I want you to know something. You're more than just a protector to me. You're family, and I couldn't have done this without you." Ethan's heart swelled at her words. He had never expected this, to become part of her world, to become a part of her family. But here he was, standing beside the woman who had changed his life forever. He had come to this galaxy as a simple student, but now he was so much more. "You don't have to say that," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I made a promise to you, and I kept it." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And for that, I'll be forever grateful." Together, they looked out at the galaxy, at the future they had just secured side by side. The road ahead would not be easy, but with each other, they knew they could face anything. Their story was just beginning,